I was a hotel cleaner working day shifts at a luxury hotel in Chicago, and at night I wrote novels nobody would publish. My favorite author checked into the hotel for an expended stay. One afternoon, while cleaning his suite, I found crumpled manuscript pages in his trash. I read them, knowing I shouldn't. The scene was not bad, just not brilliant. I kept the pages instead of throwing it away. At 2 a.m. that night, in a moment of insane courage, I rewrote it and left it on his desk the next day with a note. A fan who couldn't help himself. Later, I was called to the manager's office. I was sure I was getting fired for invading a guest's privacy, but what he told me made my stomach turn. Before we dive in, who's your favorite author? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you love stories about hidden talent and taking risks, please subscribe so you don't miss our next one. Now, let me take you back to the day I found that manuscript in the trash. I was a professional failure, living a double life. By day, I cleaned rooms at the Grandmont Hotel, a 5-star establishment in downtown Chicago, where rooms started at $400 a night, and the guests were the kind of people who'd never notice the person scrubbing their bathroom. By night, I was a writer, or at least I tried to be. I had an MFA in creative writing from a respected program. I had 2 completed novels sitting in a folder on my laptop, each one rejected by at least 50 literary agents. I had a drawer full of form rejection letters and personalized rejections that all said some version of the same thing. Your writing shows promise, but this isn't quite right for our list. I'd been trying to make it as a writer for 6 years, and for 6 years, I'd been failing. The hotel job was supposed to be temporary, just something to pay the bills while I queried agents and worked on my next book. But temporary had become 2 years, and I was starting to accept that maybe this was my life now. Maybe I wasn't going to be a published author. Maybe I was going to be the guy who cleaned toilets at a luxury hotel while nursing impossible dreams. But I couldn't stop writing. Every night after my shift, I'd go home to my studio apartment in a not great neighborhood, make instant coffee, and write until 2 or 3 a.m. Then I'd sleep for a few hours and do it all over again. It was exhausting. It was probably stupid, but it was the only thing that made me feel like myself. The Grandmont Hotel catered to a specific clientele: business executives, wealthy tourists, and occasionally celebrities who wanted discretion and luxury. I'd cleaned rooms for tech CEOs, movie stars, and once a former president. I was good at my job. I cleaned efficiently, never took photos or gossiped about guests, and understood that these people valued their privacy above almost everything else. So when Edward Coy checked into room 812 for what the front desk said would be a 3-month stay, I knew exactly how to handle it, with professional distance and absolutely no fanboy behavior, no matter how much I wanted to tell him that his novel, The Autumn Letters, had changed my life. Edward Coy was one of the most acclaimed literary authors of his generation. He'd won the Pulitzer Prize 15 years ago, had published 6 novels that critics called masterpieces of contemporary American literature, and was notoriously reclusive. He rarely gave interviews, never appeared at literary festivals, and according to industry gossip, hadn't been photographed in over a decade. And now he was staying at my hotel, probably working on his next book.
I'd read everything Coy had written. His prose was elegant and precise. His characters were complex and flawed. And he had this ability to capture the small, devastating moments that defined human relationships. He was everything I aspired to be as a writer. But when I cleaned his room, I treated him like any other guest: professional, invisible, efficient. The first few times I was going to clean room 812, Coy had left a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door, and I'd moved on to other rooms. But on my 4th day assigned to his floor, the sign was gone, and the door was slightly ajar. I knocked. "Housekeeping?" "Come in." A voice from inside, distracted, barely acknowledging my presence. I entered with my cleaning cart. The suite was large: a bedroom, a sitting area, a desk by the window overlooking the Chicago skyline. And it was a disaster. Papers everywhere. Manuscript pages covering the desk, the coffee table, scattered across the floor. Empty coffee cups on every surface. The bed unmade. The bathroom showing signs of someone who was too consumed with work to care about basic hygiene. Edward Coy himself sat at the desk, his back to me, typing furiously on a laptop. He was in his early 50s, with graying hair that looked like it hadn't been cut in months, wearing a rumpled t-shirt and jeans. He didn't look up when I entered. I'd cleaned rooms of writers before. There was always a particular kind of chaos. But this was something else. This was the workspace of someone completely consumed by their work. I cleaned quietly, trying not to disturb him. I emptied the trash bins, including the one by his desk, which was overflowing with crumpled manuscript pages. I changed the sheets, scrubbed the bathroom, restocked towels and toiletries. The entire time, Coy didn't acknowledge my presence. He just kept typing, occasionally muttering to himself, sometimes crumpling up a page and throwing it toward the trash bin, usually missing. I finished and left without him ever turning around. This became the pattern over the next 2 weeks. I'd clean roommate 12 every other day. Coy would be there, consumed by his work, and I'd move around him like a ghost. Sometimes he'd be typing, sometimes he'd be pacing, reading pages aloud to himself. Sometimes he'd be sitting motionless, staring at the screen with the expression of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. And always there were crumpled pages in the trash. I never looked at them. That would have been a violation of privacy, a breach of trust. No matter how curious I was about what Edward Coy was working on, I wasn't going to invade his creative process by reading his discarded drafts. Until the day I did. It was a Tuesday afternoon, late in my shift. I was cleaning roommate 12, and Coy was out. The first time in 2 weeks he'd left the room during my cleaning schedule. The suite was its usual disaster, but without Coy's presence, I felt more relaxed, less like I was intruding on something sacred. I was emptying the trash bin by his desk when I saw it. A full page, crumpled, but not torn, with text clearly visible. I shouldn't have read it. I knew I shouldn't, but I was tired and frustrated with my own failed writing career, and this was Edward Coy, my literary hero, the writer whose work had inspired me to pursue this impossible dream in the first place. I smoothed out the page and read. It was a scene between 2 characters, Marcus and Elena. Names I didn't recognize from any of Coy's published work, so presumably from his work in progress. They were having an argument in a car during a rainstorm, a conversation about their failing marriage and a secret one of them was keeping. The scene was fine. It was competent. The prose was clean, the dialogue functional, but it wasn't brilliant. It wasn't Coy-level brilliant. The dialogue felt stilted, like the characters were saying what Coy needed them to say rather than what they would actually say. The pacing was off. Too much exposition, not enough emotional tension, and there was a moment where Marcus made a reference that felt forced, like Coy was trying too hard to make a thematic point. I read it twice, and both times I had the same thought. I could fix this. The thought was absurd and arrogant. Who was I, a failed writer with 2 unpublished novels, to think I could improve the work of a Pulitzer Prize winner? But I couldn't shake the feeling. I could see what the scene needed. I could hear how the dialogue should flow. I could feel where the emotional beats were supposed to land. I smoothed out 2 more crumpled pages from the trash, earlier drafts of the same scene, each one slightly different. Coy had been struggling with this. He had rewritten it multiple times, and he still hadn't gotten it right. I should have thrown them away, finished cleaning, and forgotten about it. Instead, I kept the pages in the pocket of my uniform, finished my shift in a daze, and went home. That night, I couldn't write my own work. I kept thinking about Coy's scene, about what it needed, about how it could be better. At midnight, I gave in. I opened a blank document and started rewriting. I kept Coy's basic structure, the car, the rainstorm, the argument, but I rewrote the dialogue to make it sharper, more natural. I adjusted the pacing, cutting the exposition and letting the emotion speak for itself. I added a small detail, Elena noticing that Marcus was gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white, a physical manifestation of his tension that revealed more than his words could. I worked for 3 hours, revising and refining until I had a version that felt right. It was still Coy's scene, his characters, his story, his vision, but with the dialogue and pacing tightened, the emotional core clarified. When I finished, I sat back and read it through. It was good. Better than good. It was what the scene should have been. And then the reality of what I'd done hit me. I'd taken a famous author's discarded work, rewritten it, and what? What was I planning to do with this? The smart thing would be to delete it and forget this had ever happened. But I'd spent 6 years being smart, being careful, following the rules, sending polite query letters to agents who never responded, being professional and appropriate and utterly forgettable. And where had that gotten me? Nowhere. At 2 a.m., in a moment of either insane courage or career-destroying stupidity, I printed out my revised scene. I wrote a short note on a Post-it. Found this in the trash. Thought you might want another perspective. It's brilliant work. Just needed some small adjustments to let it breathe. A fan who couldn't help himself. The next morning, before my shift started, I went up to room 812. Coy's Do Not Disturb sign was up, which meant he was likely asleep or didn't want to be interrupted. I used my MasterCard key, entered as quietly as possible, and left the printed pages on his desk, held down by a coffee cup so they wouldn't blow away. Then I got out of there as fast as I could, my heart pounding. What had I done? I'd violated a guest's privacy. I'd touched a famous author's work without permission. I'd left an unsolicited rewrite like some kind of arrogant amateur who thought he knew better than a Pulitzer Prize winner. I was going to be fired, possibly sued. This was the end of my hotel job and possibly any future in the service industry.
I spent the rest of the day in a state of terror, expecting to be called into the manager's office at any moment. But my shift ended without incident, and I went home thinking maybe Coy hadn't found the pages yet. Maybe he'd throw them away without reading them. Maybe I dodged a bullet. The next morning, I arrived at work at 8 a.m. for my usual shift. I was clocking in when the front desk receptionist called out to me. "Scott, manager wants to see you at his office." My stomach dropped. This was it. I was getting fired. I walked to the manager's office like a man walking to his execution. James Pine was the hotel manager, a stern man in his 50s who ran the Grandmont with military precision. "Sit down, Scott," he said when I entered. His expression was unreadable. I sat, trying to prepare for the inevitable. "I got a call this morning from a guest, room 812. I can explain. His agent wants to speak with you immediately. I have her on the phone." He turned his desk phone toward me, the speaker light blinking. I stared at the phone like it was a bomb. "His agent? Answer it, Scott." With shaking hands, I pressed the speaker button. "This is Scott Lewis." "Mr. Lewis." The voice was crisp, professional, female. "My name is Rachel Goldstein. I represent Edward Coy. He would like to meet with you. Room 812, now. Are you available?" I looked at Pine, who nodded. "Yes," I managed. "I'm available." "Good. He's expecting you." The line went dead. Pine looked at me with an expression I couldn't read.
I don't know what you did, Scott, but you're either about to be fired or have the strangest morning of your life. Go. I took the elevator to the 8th floor in a fog of confusion and terror. Edward Coy wanted to see me. His agent had called the hotel. This was either very bad or I couldn't even imagine what the alternative was. I knocked on the door of room 812. "It's open," Coy's voice from inside. I entered to find the suite in even worse shape than usual. Papers everywhere, coffee cups multiplied. The smell of stale coffee and stress thickened the air. Edward Coy stood by the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. He turned when I entered, and I saw him clearly for the first time. Tired eyes, several days of stubble, the look of someone who'd been wrestling with something difficult for a long time. In his hand were the pages I'd left, my rewrite. "You're the cleaner?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir, Scott Lewis. I'm sorry if I overstepped." "You fixed it." He held up the pages. "This scene, I've been stuck on it for 3 months. I wrote 17 different versions. 17! And every single one was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't figure out why or how to fix it." He walked toward me, and I realized he wasn't angry. He was stunned. "And you, the guy who cleans my room, you fixed it in one night. How?" I read the versions in the trash. I shouldn't have. That was wrong of me, but I saw what you were trying to do, and I saw where it was getting stuck. The dialogue needed to be sharper. The pacing needed to breathe. And you needed a physical detail to ground the emotion. "The thing with the steering wheel." "The thing with the steering wheel," I confirmed. Coy stared at me for a long moment. "Who are you?" "I'm a writer, or I was trying to be. I have an MFA, 2 unpublished novels, a lot of rejection letters. I clean rooms to pay rent while I write at night." "Show me your work." "What?" "Your novels. Show me." "Mr. Coy, I don't—"
"I have my laptop right here. Pull up your manuscript. Now, I want to see what kind of writer thinks they can improve my work." There was no refusing. I pulled out my phone, logged into my cloud storage, and pulled up the first 50 pages of my most recent novel, the one I'd been querying agents with for the past year, the one that had gotten me 53 rejections so far. I sent the file to my email, logged in on Coy's laptop, and pulled it up for him. "Sit," he said, settling into the desk chair. I sat in one of the nearby armchairs, waiting awkwardly while Edward Coy, Pulitzer Prize winner, my literary hero, read my work in silence. He didn't scroll quickly. He read carefully, occasionally making small sounds, a grunt, once what might have been a small laugh. It was the most excruciating hour of my life. Finally, he looked up at me. "This is raw, undisciplined in places. Your sentences sometimes try too hard to be beautiful when they should just be clear. And you have a tendency to over-explain emotional beats that would be stronger if you trusted your reader more." My heart sunk. Of course, he hated it. "But," Coy continued, "the talent is undeniable. You have an ear for dialogue I haven't seen in 20 years. Your characters talk like real people, not like vessels for thematic points. And you have instincts about pacing and emotional rhythm that most writers never develop." He stood up, looking at me with an intensity that was unnerving. "Why aren't you published?" "Because no one wants to publish me," I said simply. "I've queried every agent I can find. The feedback is always the same. It's too literary for commercial markets, too commercial for literary markets. It falls between categories. No one knows how to sell it." "That's bullshit," Coy said bluntly. "The industry is risk-averse and lazy. They want books that fit neat categories because those are easier to market. Work that's actually interesting gets rejected for being hard to categorize. He started pacing, the way I'd seen him do while working on his manuscript. I'm behind on my deadline. 6 months behind. My editor is threatening to pull the plug on this book if I don't deliver in 3 months. I've been stuck for months, unable to break through, working 18-hour days and getting nowhere. He stopped and looked at me. I need help. Not a ghostwriter. This is still my book, my vision, my voice. But I need a collaborator. Someone who can read my drafts, tell me when something's not working, help me find the version that's right. Someone with instincts as good as yours. My mouth went dry. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you 3 months. Work with me. Help me finish this novel. I'll pay you $10,000 a month, more than you're making cleaning rooms. And when we're done, if we succeed, I'll introduce you to my agent and my editor. I'll make them read your work. If it's as good as I think it is, you'll get a meeting. Possibly a deal. No guarantees, but a real shot. I couldn't breathe. This was impossible. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. Why? I managed. Why would you do this? Because I've been doing this for 30 years and I can recognize real talent when I see it. And because the industry that rejected you is the same industry that would have rejected me if I hadn't gotten lucky early. You deserve a chance. He held out his hand. 3 months. Starting now. Are you in? I thought about my studio apartment, my mountain of student debt, my 2 unpublished novels, the 6 years I'd spent trying and failing to break into publishing. I thought about the rejection letters, the agents who had never responded, the slow death of hope that came from hearing no over and over and over.
And I thought about the scene I'd fixed last night, about the feeling of making something better, of using my skills to solve a problem that had stumped a Pulitzer Prize winner. I took his hand. I'm in. The next 3 months were the most intense of my life. I quit my job at the hotel. Pine was surprisingly understanding when I explained I was working with Edward Coy, and even seemed pleased that one of his employees was getting such an opportunity. I moved into a small room in Coy's suite. Not the bedroom, that was his. But the sitting area had a couch I could sleep on. We worked 18-hour days, sometimes more. Coy would write scenes. I would read them, mark them up, suggest changes. We'd discuss every line, every word choice, every emotional beat. Sometimes he'd accept my suggestions immediately. Sometimes we'd argue for hours about a single paragraph. He was brilliant, but demanding. He pushed me to think deeper, to question my instincts, to understand not just what worked, but why it worked. He tore apart my assumptions about writing and rebuilt them stronger. You write good dialogue because you listen, he told me one night at 2 a.m., both of us exhausted and running on coffee and determination. But you need to trust it more. Stop explaining what your characters mean. Let their words speak for themselves. I learned more in those 3 months than I had in 2 years of my MFA program. Coy taught me about structure, about pacing, about the architecture of a novel. He showed me how to cut ruthlessly, how to know when a scene needed to be there and when it was just pretty writing that didn't serve the story. And somehow, slowly, his novel came together. The scenes clicked into place, the characters deepened, the thematic threads wove together into something cohesive and powerful. The book Coy was writing was called The Distance Between Us, a multi-generational family saga about 3 brothers dealing with their father's death and the secrets he'd left behind. It was ambitious, emotionally complex, and in Coy's hands, absolutely stunning. But it wouldn't have been finished without our collaboration. I knew that, and Coy knew that. My contributions weren't just editorial. I helped him see blind spots in character motivation, suggested structural changes that tightened the narrative, wrote alternative versions of scenes that he'd then refine into something better than either of us could have created alone. When we finally typed the end on page 487, we both sat in exhausted silence for a long moment. "We did it," Coy said finally. "You did it. I just helped. Don't diminish your contribution. This book wouldn't exist without you." He sent the manuscript to his editor that night. 2 weeks later, we got the response. "This is your best work yet. Absolutely brilliant. We're moving forward with publication." Coy kept his promise. He introduced me to his agent, Rachel Goldstein, the woman I'd first spoken to on that terrifying phone call months ago. Rachel read my revised manuscript. I'd spent my nights during those 3 months rewriting my novel, incorporating everything Coy had taught me, and called me 2 days later. "I want to represent you, Scott. This is special, really special. I think we can sell this." 6 weeks later, Rachel got me a 3-book deal with a major publisher. The advance was modest by publishing standards, $80,000 for all 3 books, but it was more money than I'd ever imagined having. More importantly, it was validation. It was proof that I wasn't crazy, that the dream I'd been chasing for 6 years was actually possible. My first novel, The Unfinished Room, the one that had been rejected 53 times, was scheduled for publication in 18 months, after substantial revisions with my editor.
When The Distance Between Us was published 9 months later, it was an immediate critical and commercial success. It hit the New York Times bestseller list, got glowing reviews, and was shortlisted for the National Book Award. In his acknowledgments, Coy wrote, "To Scott Lewis, who saw what this book could be when I couldn't see it myself, and who taught me that talent can be found in the most unexpected places. This book is as much yours as it is mine." When journalists asked me about him in interviews, he was generous and honest. He explained how we'd met, how I'd fixed a scene he'd been struggling with, how our collaboration had made his book better. The story went viral. "Hotel Cleaner becomes published author after editing Pulitzer winner's manuscript" was the headline in a dozen publications. I gave interviews. I went on podcasts. People loved the narrative. The struggling writer who took a chance, the famous author who recognized talent, the unlikely collaboration that produced great work. But the real story, the one that mattered to me, was simpler than that. I'd spent 6 years being told I wasn't good enough. 6 years hearing no from agents and editors and anyone who could have given me a chance. I'd been on the verge of giving up, of accepting that maybe I was just going to be a failed writer. And then I'd taken a risk. I'd done something reckless and possibly stupid. I'd rewritten a famous author's scene and left it for him to find, knowing I might get fired, knowing it might ruin everything. But I'd done it anyway, because I loved writing more than I feared the consequences, because I couldn't not do it. And that risk, that moment of courage or stupidity or desperation, had changed my life. 18 months after that day in room 812, I stood in a bookstore in Chicago looking at the display table near the entrance. 2 books sat side by side, The Distance Between Us by Edward Coy and The Unfinished Room by Scott Lewis. Coy was there with me. He'd insisted on attending my book launch, had given a generous introduction, and told the assembled crowd that I was one of the most talented writers of this generation. "How does it feel?" he asked me as we looked at the display. "Surreal, terrifying, amazing. You earned this, you know that, right? Not because you got lucky or because I helped you, because you're genuinely talented and you worked harder than anyone I know. I got lucky that you recognized it. You made your own luck. You took a risk when most people would have played it safe. That's what separates the people who make it from the people who don't. Not talent, but courage." A woman approached with both books in her hands, asking if we'd sign them. We did. "Thank you," I said to Coy, "for taking a chance on me, for seeing something in that rewrite, for everything." He smiled. "Thank you for fixing my scene and for teaching me that sometimes the best collaborators are the ones you find in the most unexpected places." We stood there for a while longer,
watching people browse the shelves, occasionally picking up one of our books. And I thought about all the struggling writers out there, the ones working day jobs and writing at night, the ones collecting rejection letters, the ones starting to wonder if their dreams are impossible. I wanted to tell them what I'd learned, that talent isn't enough and neither is hard work. Sometimes you need luck. Sometimes you need someone to give you a chance. But most importantly, sometimes you need to be brave enough to take a risk, even when it might cost you everything. Because the biggest risk isn't failing. It's never trying at all.
What did you think of Scott's decision to rewrite the scene? Was it bold courage or crossing a line? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story about hidden talent, taking impossible risks, and finding your big break touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more meaningful stories every day. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss our next inspiring tale. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.